Welcome everyone. So we are located very far from the main building. So I suspect some people might be coming in late. Please ignore it. We'll just start anyway and allow for the people that come in late to take a seat quietly. Welcome everyone. My name is Iris Muis. I will be your moderator for this panel. I work at Utrecht University, mainly in digital ethics. I've been one of the co-authors of FRAIA, the Fundamental Rights and Algorithms Impact Assessment. Shameless plug, we'll be hosting a workshop on that tomorrow. So if you're interested, please feel free and visit that as well. Right now, we are doing the panel Beyond Failures, Repairing the Future of AI with Public Values. And I noticed that the term public values does not really come often in the program. So I'm really glad that we will be dissecting this concept today. I have 4 wonderful panelists here today. I will start introducing them, starting with Annie. At the left, Annie Oyayarvi, she's Senior Lead Human Foresight and Strategy in the Innovation and Growth team at Kela. Kela is the social insurance agency in Finland, providing like the basic economic needs for citizens of Finland. So it's really wonderful to have your very practical practitioner perspective on board today, Annie. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Diletta Huiskes from Italy. She is a researcher at University of Milan. Her research focuses on ethical and political aspects of digital technology. She has a background in philosophy and is now doing a PhD in sociology. She's also the CEO of a company called Immanence, stimulating ethical assessments within mostly government organizations. And she works for an NGO, Privacy Network, very busy lady. I'm so happy that you could join us today. Privacy Network, which is an NGO focused also on digital rights. We have Professor Minna Rukenstein. She is from the University of Helsinki, all the way from Finland as well. She's a professor in emerging technologies in society. She is lead of the Consumer Society Research Center, which focuses on repair and renewal of algorithmic systems. She looks at everyday engagement with digital technology, not only in Finland, but also in China. So that's 2 very interesting perspectives there. Very glad to have you on board as well. Also the main organizer of this panel, which is University of Helsinki. Then we have Mirko Tobias Schaefer. He is assistant professor at Utrecht University and also affiliated with University of Helsinki. He is principal investigator of Data School, which is a platform within Utrecht University which focuses on the societal impact of technology. As I said before, we're also authors of the FRAIA, Fundamental Rights and Algorithms Impact Assessment. We do a lot of work with government officials in the Netherlands, and Mirko will provide kind of like the Dutch perspectives on this topic. As you might know, in the Netherlands there have been a lot of AI failures, so that's an interesting take on today's topic. So we thought about, how can we structure this panel to make it fun for you as an audience, not being bored by 10-minute introductions by all of the speakers before we get to the juicy questions. So I would like to start off with a question for our panelists, which is, I think, the most important question of today. What have AI failures taught us? And Minna, could I start with you?
Yeah, so thanks for the introductions. And before I start, I'll explain a little bit more where I'm coming from, because I understand that it might be a little bit strange for the audience of this conference. So this conference is not really my crowd. My crowd would be more like anthropology, SDS, media and communication, critical data studies, etc. So I was trained as an anthropologist, but I've moved into this very interdisciplinary space where we are looking at digital society making from a number of perspectives. And I'm currently leading two big consortiums. One of them is Repair, which is looking at various kinds of breakages in algorithmic systems. So we are looking at when things don't go exactly the way they should be, but the breakage can also be well, I'll give you some examples because that will make it easier to grasp. And then the other project where I have people working in 6 different countries, actually, not only China, but also in UK, Denmark, Sweden, wherever, Belgium. And in that project, the idea is that we look at work done in different areas in terms of algorithmic systems, from insurance, health, construction industry, and then we try to look at what is actually the automation logic that is at play here in the specifics, but also more generally. And then we try to understand what is it doing in terms of public values. So public values are often thrown around like, okay, then we have solidarity, then we have autonomy, but we actually need to look at how those values are emerging in different practices in different cases. So it's not easy to actually say what value is at play in, so I'll also give you some examples of that. So Professor of Emerging Technologies, what does it mean when we talk about emerging technologies? Some people think that it's new technologies, but it's actually not. The idea is that technologies keep emerging. AI has been emerging for decades, and the work that most people are doing in this conference, they're also part of that emergence because they're trying to shape and whip technologies into certain kind of shape, but there are also other actors who are shaping those technologies than lawyers and regulators, and I'm basically mostly interested in the other actors, practitioners and citizens who are using these technologies, and by their way of using them, they are actually part of that emergence as well. So AI failures, they are often talked about by way of scandal cases. We have chatbot praising the Nazis, or we have gender biases in hiring, and we have fraud detection systems that punish the poor. But there are also a lot of AI failures that go unnoticed. And I'm also interested in looking at those unnoticed ones, which are kind of business as usual, because developing these systems is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to get them right. So there's constant failures and repair efforts, which actually makes this field very, very dynamic. People are learning as they go about these technologies. So, and you could even say that because when you digitalize, you bring different data sets together or whatever, you're also always creating different kinds of vulnerabilities and possibilities for breakages. So I'll give you an example. My colleague at the University of Helsinki, Tuukka Lehtiniemi, was studying risk prediction model in child welfare services. And this is something that, a lot of techies want to do. Their dream is kind of like, we'll solve the child protection issues, or because they want to do things that would be good for the society. Another case that they love is mental health issues of young people, because it would be something fantastic. It would make sense economically, but it would also make sense societally. But this is very, very difficult. So most of the cases in child protection services, for instance, they have failed. We have a lot of examples of why it doesn't work, And the main thing is that why it doesn't work is that when you try to solve a complex societal issues by way of technologies, it just doesn't, it's not easy to do. So what failed in this case was the risk prediction model that was supposed to predict the risk of a certain child being taken into custody, had basically no predictive value. There was not enough data, not good quality data. But I think that the more important failure was that it wasn't needed. This was not something that social workers needed. They know how to anticipate whether a child is in need of protection if they have the resources to do their work properly. So after Tuukka's work was published, we went back and had a workshop with the social workers. And interestingly, the failed case was a good case in the sense that it made AI much more concrete to these social workers. And I think that one of the kind of public debate failures is that we talk about AI on a very general level. So then it can be anything. So when you actually see AI in action, that's what it does. Then you can start thinking, how would it actually help us in our work? So we asked the social workers, are you afraid of AI taking your jobs? And they were like, no, we want more AI. And why do they want AI is that they would like tools to help them with the information overload. So to deal with the complexity of information that they have. But then when we actually talked to them about what they want, it wasn't actually AI. It was really like bringing stuff together. So good old digitalization. So I think one of the things also when we talk about AI, we actually need to put it into a longer context, at least in the public sector, longer context of automation. When we look at AI in our cases, we often find out that it's actually not AI. It's decision trees, it's Excels or whatever, but it just sounds better to call it AI. So what do AI failures teach here? So one of the things is that we need to think about what are we trying to solve with AI? What is the problem? What are we building and to whom? And also how do we make our debates precise enough that we are actually talking about the same thing?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So something that kind of like stood out to me during your answer was what you said about unnoticed AI failures, that they happen a lot, but we don't hear about them in the media. During the preparation for this panel, we obviously talked about different contexts, the Finnish context, the Dutch context, the Italian context, and Diletta, you said something very interesting about the Italian context, which I think relates a lot to this term of unnoticed AI failures. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was also impressed by many things that Mina said, especially because she was putting it in a broader context. And I think that's really important because I was also realizing just now that failures is something that has always been at the center, not of AI, but of technology in general. So my theoretical background is STS and specifically the social construction of technology. And all of these people that studied technologies in the 70s and 80s, they were focusing on failures and contradictions and problems and a lot of human choices that were involved in how to direct a technology in a way or another. So many things that happened that had to do with fight also between different actors that had to, make decisions, and that brought a technology, and they call this process stabilization. So at some point it arrives at a point where it just, stabilizes. But with AI today, it's, I mean, I think it would be even more interesting to look at this. So this is one of the things that I try to look at to see how this stabilization works, because we know that AI continually evolves and changes. So I think this is interesting also to put failures in a more, you know, technological, historical context, because then we can see that they play a huge role in how this stabilization at some point arrives. Because, yeah, and to bring Italy in the picture. So I was thinking about that, what I told you when we were preparing this panel, so that Italy didn't have, I mean, it didn't have any AI failures, because we only had one failure 4 or 5 years ago, that it's related to the allocation of teachers in schools in Italy. So there has been quite a lot of, you know, noise about it, and it was perceived a bit like a scandal, because then there have been 2 court rulings about it, and you know, it was put, it was clear that automated decision making had to respect some rules. But in the public debate and in the media, I can't recall anything that had to do with, you know, algorithm or automated decision making. AI was not the case, because technically speaking was not AI in any way. It was something very simple, but yeah, it still made a lot of mistakes. It didn't have a lot of, I mean, direct impact on human rights, for example, because, you know, it was a matter of where people were sent to work, which, I mean, it still has a lot of impact, but there was no discrimination involved, for example, or anything like that. So there has been some, you know, some discourse about it, but it was very little, also because it was 5 years ago, so it was a completely different time. And yeah, the impression that we have, so with my NGO, we did a lot of work in tracing which algorithms and which automation public administrations use in Italy, just for just a matter of, you know, basic transparency. But yeah, that's already very difficult for us to do. So there are many, but the idea is that we don't have a public discourse around AI. So we don't even have a public discourse around AI failures, because then what I was thinking is that if you don't have any construction, so if there is not social construction, then there can't be failure, you know? So it's, yeah, I think it's interesting, because I think we didn't learn anything, because, yeah, without, you know, every time, so to bring also the Netherlands in the picture, what happened there that Mirko will tell us about. So the Netherlands is one example, but there are many others. So failures that happened in other social contexts, in other countries, in Europe especially, that are being used to say, you know, we can just look at them. We don't need our own scandal to react. But then, yeah, every time people, I talk with Italian people, they told me, you know, we need a scandal in order to do something. So, I mean, I think this is a bit sad, but maybe it's also important to note that maybe it has to do with culture again, or I'm not sure about this, but yeah, also the thing that scandals in a way play a role in, you know, repairing practices and governance in the place, because yeah, we don't have any, basically.
Thank you so much for this insight. I will go to Mirko first to sketch a little bit more this Dutch context you were referring to, and then I will get to you, Annie. Mirko, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, so the data school investigates how data and algorithms are used in public management mostly, but also media industries. And we study the phenomenon up close. We're not studying from afar from within the university, but we are usually with our colleagues on site and work side by side with civil servants, for instance, to look at their data practices, but also think, how can we intervene? How can we make changes? And several times it has been mentioned that the Netherlands stand out because of their well-known scandal, the so-called child benefit scandal, where a discriminatory system punished innocent parents to pay back sums that they required for child benefits. Child benefit in the Netherlands, childcare is quite expensive in the Netherlands. Actually, any household has to apply for those additional fundings. 3 days a week childcare costs you 1,500 euros a month. There are many people who bring that home as a month's salary. So you see that this is just a portion of money many households have to apply for funding. The child benefit scandal was not related to artificial intelligence, despite being the go-to case example for poor artificial intelligence. But at best, it was a regression analysis or something that has been used. What is much more important is that it was not a technological failure as such, it was a political and social failure. It was political pressure that forced civil servants to accept the outcomes of the data analysis as face value, because the current government had already budgeted in the alleged repaid sums for social fraud into their budget. So they had this fictive idea, we gain money from these fraudulent persons and we calculate that into our household. So there was a significant political pressure on the civil servants to just comply and carry on with the practice and target innocent people as such. So this is also something that we always try to address. Don't look always at the technology. So this also puts into question certifications or the idea of an honest or fair algorithm, because the context matters so much. But then back to the public for AI failures, which is really relevant. The child benefit scandal has helped us to make data ethics just a topic, to speak about it in the Netherlands, to gain a political momentum, to work differently, also to balance these political asymmetries. But there are also failures that go unnoticed. An example would be the city of Rotterdam, also using an algorithm for detecting social benefit fraud. But it was, in that case, the civil servants who noticed that the algorithm was doing something wrong. The wrong person showed up at the desk for additional scrutiny, and they noticed this is not right. So the people with the domain expertise, the subject matter expertise, knew something was wrong, and they were discontinuing the algorithm without anyone noticing about it. And the city then started an investigation, the audit office of Rotterdam, to see what went wrong in the development of this algorithm. And they changed the rules. They even had a very scathing report called Color Technology that exposed the discrimination, the racial discrimination in the algorithm, and developed new rules. A couple of months ago, Wired magazine all of a sudden encountered this example and had a big article about it, not mentioning, only in a byline, that the algorithm was developed by Accenture. We don't know who did it, why they did it, what they were paid for. And the city of Rotterdam, that was more than compliant and cooperative with the journalist, was the one that was bashed more than 1.5 years after the fact, when all of their civil servants had already changed procedure, when they had new local regulation in place, how to build algorithms. So the failures are important in one thing, to gain attention, also to stimulate public discourse. But sometimes we have also to accept that our media at the moment are very keen to tell bad stories. Minna has also an example, a similar one, also with Wired magazine. So we have to see, and this is now I'm getting to the point, what do we learn from failures? The failures point us to the fact, the ones that are reported and even the ones that are unreported, that with technology, but also with policy, emerges a real network of compensation or repair practices on all levels, on the direct level of application of technology, thinking about the development, the procurement, the implementation, the governance, There you see people repairing stuff. Actually, we have people in the room that do that in public institutions on a daily basis. In the Netherlands, we create these positions now for data ethics officers to actually officially care for repair of algorithms. And it also happens on other levels. Think of tech journalists that develop an awareness for reporting on such incidents, scrutinizing such incidents. And it goes even further that the public takes notice. And we, the data school, also train city councils in developing the necessary literacy for engaging in informed debate about technology and policy.
Thank you so much. Annie, please go ahead.
Thanks. I have to start with my background because I'm coming from public sector. In a social insurance institution in Finland, has 6,400 personnel, and in there I'm working in innovation units, so trying to get the new technology to the best practice. But my background is actually, I've been working there for 8 months, so I might not know everything, but I'm like slowly starting. My background is in sociology and ethnography, so I'm really curious of kind of coming back to public sector. I was eight years in consultancy, and previously that I was in academic positions and in public sector. So my perspective is like I'm coming back and bringing something. So it's kind of like the human's perspective. I'm working with tech people. There's 30 people of us, and there's a couple of designers. And then there's me having the title of designer, but actually being a social science person and saying this out loud. And trying to create the alternative futures with the tech people. So here comes the why we learn or we don't learn. If we want to learn, there's two things we need to be. We need to be open about it. There's cases, like you said, which are like hidden somewhere. 8 months in public sector, and not saying that only in our, but I feel that it's really hard to be out and open with things that are not ready. Our history in public sectors, we do stuff ready and then we start informing others. So, and we're super afraid of making mistakes. So the whole innovation unit is teaching our organization, maybe we should do something, maybe we should have like discussions. We have actually academics researching us and starting the debate about like what type of things we need to learn. So openness is the first one. And the second is like ability to learn from our mistakes. And this is something I've learned about being also IT consultancy with tech people. Tech people in general don't learn about from reading other failures. And I think this is about discussion. It's hard to start discussing. We have huge data leakage, and I've started discussing like how can we, right now in Finland with the city of Helsinki, and I'm already raising the question, how can we predict what we should do? But in tech, it's learning like failing fast, experimenting, and learning by doing, which is a good thing. And it's something that we need to do, because the other option is it's learning by doing it quietly and start just using it. And I think in a lot of the big scandals, it has been like we're doing the best things and we're just gonna go ahead and start doing it. So there's this idea of experimenting, but then there needs to be the openness also about what we're doing and what we learn about, like, for example, about predictive models and what type of data we should have. We could do that also a little bit forehand. We can go to the users and actually understand what should be the problem that we are what problem we should solve. But I know that working with tech people, they come to me and sometimes like, Anni, we have the solution. Now we only, you need to tell to what, which is kind of super interesting, because like I know you're like, every time I'm talking to them, they have solution to all of things that they're not sure of what. And I think that's the key of the problem. We're like, how should we like turn this to the what type of problems we need to solve, and what type of the AI efficiency that it's gonna come and it's gonna help us in what way, to what problems. So I think that's kind of the openness and discussion we need to start doing. It's not about right and wrong, it's more about my different kind of perspective and dialogue.
Yeah, thank you so much. So very interesting to hear, first of all, about AI failures, or put more broadly, digital technology failures. We heard about the risk prediction system in Finland, the teacher allocation algorithm that's not being talked about as a technology failure, the childcare benefit scandal in the Netherlands. But this panel is called Beyond AI Failures. So let's go beyond the failures. What can we do to repair these failures in connection with public values? Is there anyone who would like to answer this question first? Yeah, Mina, go ahead.
Thanks. So how do we repair? I think we see a lot of repair on the go. So with different kinds of breakages, there's also a lot of repair on the go. But I think that in order to repair, we should also understand a little bit better what does this idea of public values, for instance, mean in terms of algorithmic systems. If we think that we want to repair algorithmic systems in a societally beneficial manner. So I'll give you an example of efficiency, because efficiency is super interesting, because often social scientists argue against efficiency optimization. They're like, that's a bad thing. And I've told them, why would it be a bad thing? We actually want these systems to be efficient. But there's two kinds of efficiency at play. There's the cost-cutting efficiency, which is often thought about as the efficiency. And then we have the efficiency that actually makes our societies more efficient in terms of, if we think about the welfare society, we want public service delivery to be efficient. In Finland, we are a very sparsely populated, aging country, so there's a lot to think about there. So how do we think about good efficiency? And this is very interesting. We have a lot of civil servants in Finland who have a very internalized good governance principles. So they think about equality, for instance. How do we combine equality and efficiency? So it needs to start from the idea that, okay, so how do we do efficient public services that reach everybody and treat everybody the same? And this is, of course, an ongoing conversation, because we don't have very many examples of this. As a good example of automation in Finland, I could mention taxation, which is very, very automated by now. And one of the reasons that it works is because it has a very particular kind of citizen-state relationship. It's very trusting towards what citizens are doing. So, and of course, because it's automated, every year they're kind of screening certain types of people and not others. But they get a very good idea of, for instance, who files their taxes on time, and what kind of problems there might be. And I don't hear any criticism towards this system, none whatsoever. The other thing that is problematic here is that when automation works, when algorithmic systems work, when AI works, it disappears from sight. So it's difficult to actually identify the really good cases that would teach us how to go beyond failures.
Great. Annie, maybe you want to add something? Coming from a practitioner's perspective. Yeah, these are great, it's a great framework, of course, but how do you put this into practice?
That's a tricky part. We look at the taxation, we look at the trust, and we always come back to that. How can we trust, and what type of kind of trust issues we have with our customers. And to have a background, 3 out of 4 Finnish people are our customers, so basically most of the Finns are. So who can we trust, and to what level we can trust that? And I think that's the core, and we can start with that, but also like how are we develop these in a way that also everybody, our citizens, know why we're doing this and what type of automation there is. And I think that's comes back to the openness of things, but also to make them trustworthy. I think it needs the dialogue of what can we do and can't do, and what type of values. Cost efficiency right now in Finland is something that is like in public sector, that's the thing to have, like an innovation unit. Everything goes forward if we start talking about like efficiency, costing. And that's fine, that's understandable, but at the same time we need to have the other values, and we need to have the kind of customers or citizens beside the technical and costing. And I'm afraid that if we don't have clear processes, that the only thing that we start measuring is the money. And I think in that type of climate, tech and costing is a threat to the democracy and the public value we are talking about.
Yeah, so we are really diving into the public values here. I've heard trust multiple times, transparency, openness, a dialogue. Mirko, maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on public values and putting them, or like making them concrete. Diletta, I would like to come back to you on the discourse around public values, and maybe also cultural aspects that play a role there.
So to begin with, public values are problematic because they are quite flexible. So when the Netherlands put in place their this thing that turned out to be the child benefit scandal, there was the understanding in politics that the zeitgeist asked for a more punitive approach towards benefit fraud. And we have just to be honest, we are not hunting fraudulent recipients as a society. I mean, it's a great value to say the public funds should only go to those who have a right to them. But if we look at abusers of our system, and we see white-collar crime, we see the cum-ex fraud and other things, we see that our governments across Europe have very little interest in hunting down those frauds. They do not give the capacities to neither the police or the state prosecutors to be effective about combating this kind of fraud. So our public value, if it's aligned with a popular zeitgeist or even populist zeitgeist, that we need to get money back from the tiny percentage of people who commit social benefit fraud, we should question the value of our so-called public values. And I'm saying that also, I mean, we pat ourselves in Europe on the back because we have the GDPR and the AI Act, but we see how AI and data technologies are used at our borders to marginalize and harm migrants. So we can be quite skeptical about the value of our public values and whether we mean what we say. What have we noticed in our work with multiple municipalities is that public values are actually ingrained in technology. So the technology is far from neutral. If there is a poverty detection algorithm in a social democratic municipality, it has different indicators and different consequences than when the same objective is developed as an algorithm in a liberal municipality. So despite the fact that all the municipalities, and I think this might be annoying for the lawyers in the room, all the municipalities are moving in the same area of law, but yet there are many distinctions from each and every one of these organizations. And it is very important to make them explicit, because the civil servants that actually are developing these technologies or implementing them have no political mandate. They are targeted by political leadership to do something, and the political leadership is regularly ignorant about the fact that there are values embedded carried by technology and actually affecting values or undermining them. So back to the childcare benefit scandal, the value that our money is just to be spent for those who have a right to it, who are eligible to receive it, is a great value. I think we find a broad consensus in our society. But if it's applied in a way that we think we target a certain community in society, we are not fighting fraud. We are fighting stereotypes of fraudulent persons. And then we undermine another value that is dear to us, namely the value that you're innocent until proven guilty. That is the basic of our judicial system, actually. But in this case, through the ill-conceived use of technology and political policy, we make someone guilty by suspicion because the person is poor.
Diletta, please go ahead.
I go. Yeah, I mean, thank you, Mirko, for many things that you said. They're very important, especially, I mean, I really like the last one. To add on this, I just wanted to say that, I mean, public values are complicated. Values in general are tricky, difficult to define, but they're for sure very contextual. So when we talk about public values and culture, which is what I look at in my research, we have to know that not only it changes across different countries, it also potentially changes inside the same country. So in Italy, for example, we have this a lot. And, you know, in my research, I'm looking at how public administrations use or govern or don't use what, in general, what they do with automation of public services. And my main case studies are Italy and the Netherlands. So I find a lot of differences, and they, I mean, they relate with culture a lot, and most of them Mirko already said, but others are more shared, which is also very interesting, I think, and they have to do more with the attitudes towards technology itself, so techno-optimism or not, but the general, you know, faith that we have that has to do a lot with the automation bias, for example, right? So the faith that we have in technology as something neutral, objective, it's still there, and it's really shared across different cultures. So this is really interesting for me, because it doesn't matter like the values that we share or not share, how we perceive many things, equality or transparency, but we still have a lot of faith in what technology can objectively bring and do for us. And from what I've seen, we still believe that technology can do better than humans in many different tasks. So that's also something that we could investigate more, I think. And for what concerns the cultural part of it, what I noticed, so in Italy, what happened after what I told you before, so this mini scandal related to teachers' allocation, basically, I mean, as a bigger consequence, I see that we're not really on the techno-optimistic path, but we're rather on the fear path, which is equally problematic, I think, because, I mean, it's not good to have this fear and to don't want to do anything openly because you know you're afraid of the public consequences of it. So the result is, what do we do? Because it's not that we don't use technology in Italy, we do use technology in public administrations, but there's so much untransparency about it right now, because you know the idea is that it's better to hide it and to you know, try to do it and try to do something and not talk about it until you're, you know, stabilized, to go back. But yeah, I mean, stabilization, again, is something that can occur in years and years. So in the meantime, what happens, it's really problematic. And on a last note, the first you know, project on the automation of public services I worked on was in Trento some years ago, which is a city in the northern east part of Italy, which has a very specific culture because it's very close to the border with northern countries. So the culture is really different compared to, you know, Rome or even Turin, which is on the other side, or Sicily, for example. So they wanted to use and to develop an algorithm to assess students in schools. And they found it a great idea and a great project because it was objective. So what their idea was to develop this algorithm and then in Trento, and then use it to the like propose it to the ministry to apply it all over the country. And they asked us, so can you help us doing this? I was working at a research center. And the third thing we noticed is that you cannot apply the same rules and same methods in Trento and in Palermo at the same time, you know? So this is something, I mean, that I think it's a bit overlooked, but it's, I think, very important.
Contextualizing these systems and the values ingrained in them. Yeah, thank you. I want to open up the floor to questions from the audience. Yes?
Thank you. Thank you very much. A lot of interesting aspects. I was wondering if we mentioned transparency, we mentioned the role of culture. I was wondering if the private-public interplay in the implementation of the technologies plays a role or has an impact at least, because I was curious about that. So if you have any comments on that. Or
I could start because also because Mirko mentioned the Wired magazine case. So we study prisoners training AI, and there's also a public-private partnership. It's a private company that kind of buys work from prison. And this sounds very bad from the outside, you know. Wired wrote about how this is really one of those cases, you know. You start buying cheap labor from prison, and isn't this bad for prisoners? And interestingly, you know, my colleague who was interviewed for that, you know, kind of seemed a bit like naive that he doesn't understand what's going on. But precisely for that reason, we wanted to study it. Is there a possibility to do prisoners training data labor differently if we have various kinds of regulations in place, as we do in Finland? So there, in that context, the company can't just buy labor from the prison for cheap, but there's different kinds of contracts with companies that do work in prisons. So public-private partnerships, of course, they need from the public sector some kind of understanding of what is good for the public sector. This is, of course, always not the case at all. Public sector is also used as a test bed for private companies. We see a lot of, this where, you know, in the social and health field, for instance, you know, there's a startup A comes in, you know, basically they're doing user studies there, and then they run with the results and go elsewhere, or they get access to data or something like that. But in this prisoners training AI case, the interesting thing was that it seems to be like a win-win case for the public sector. Prison needs work for prisoners. Company is pretty happy with it. It's better quality data than from Amazon Mechanical Turk. And prisoners are pretty happy because they get out of their cells. So that's basically it.
Another question at the back of the room.
May I add to that question about the public engagement? So there's one example in the Netherlands that's noteworthy. The city of Amersfoort, a small city north of Utrecht, wanted to acquire an algorithm for identifying social benefit fraud. And because of the debate in the Netherlands, the city council was aware of the possibility of bias in such things. And they requested an audit before such an algorithm would be implemented first. and was the first time that this algorithm that was widely used was audited in the Netherlands. And it appeared to be that it was unauditable. TNO, the institute that audited it, noticed there was not proper documentation. The code was not well delivered in a way that it could be easily reproduced. When they got the model and they tried to reproduce this, they noticed that it wouldn't do what it promised to do. So for the first time, there was this public scrutiny of an algorithm. And that was because there was this heated debate already going on. But also in earlier instances, public participation through activism or through opinion leaders has been very crucial in the Netherlands.
Another question here.
Yes, is it working? Yeah. Now I was triggered by the comment by Diletta when she mentioned we need a scandal in Italy. And in a sense, it's quite the exact point of this panel, I think. So it's more like a comment I want to make when there's this famous notion, I think it's famous, by Goldry and Machias in their book Data Colonization, about what we need is seamfulness. Instead of a seamless network where the infrastructure is being hidden, where everything happens on the backside, and it still gives the impression that technology is indeed harmless, neutral, it comes out of the air and suddenly, and it helps us to solve societal problems. As long as that happens, everybody thinks that's the way technology works. But when something goes wrong, it opens up a debate. And of course, that's really bad for the people involved in that. But hopefully, indeed, like we're doing in this panel, and generally it should be done, we learn from it and make it better and make people more aware. And also reminds me of what typically somebody talked about SDS, what typically called infrastructure inversion. So instead of having this hidden infrastructure, it opens up the infrastructure and makes it debatable, makes it it's negotiable again. It's not like stabilized, as been mentioned, but it's opened up. The black box is opened again. It's making it negotiable, and then other stakeholders than only the engineers can take part in that negotiation. So I think it's a very important thing happening. I think Cambridge Analytica, I think Snowden, it's due these kind of big scandals that the whole debate came into the public. Even in the Netherlands, the scandal on the child benefits led to a new party, even a political party, which is now probably in government or not. But so in that sense, it's quite important that these things are happening, we would say.
Thank you for adding this notion of seamfulness instead of seamlessness. Diletta, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think it's really difficult to bring this kind of, imaginary about technology in the real, like, practical world. I struggle a lot because I'm very passionate about the social construction and the idea to open the black box to social analysis, but then you go to the companies and they will tell you, I mean, there's trade secrets and we cannot open the black box to you. So not even governments, because I'm not even interested in companies, I'm more interested in governments. But then when there is a private-public partnership, it's still a private actor, or even if it's a public body, as I was saying in Italy, for example, they have so much fear to open up because they don't want to be criticized or they don't want help. So I think it's really delicate and sensitive, that help that you want to give them or the way that you can open to other stakeholders. So that's basically what my professional path brought me to the idea that, I mean, at least for me, advocacy and research were not enough in tackling this really concrete impacts on society. So at some point I decided to co-found this company to go and sit together with data scientists and computer scientists. And at that point, they can open the black box to me and I can tell them, or we can decide together to negotiate what they need to do and what, it's better to do for a specific social context. So what needs to be done, what is better to not do, what are the impacts, what is the model. So that is something that I personally believe in right now as a, remedy or a solution to it. But yeah, it's my personal experience.
Yeah, great bridge onto repairing practices. This is also something that we want to discuss as like final point of this panel, repairing practices, because it's beyond failures. Annie and Mina, do you want to comment on this?
I could start with because it's who are responsible and to what. And I think your comment, like, it's to the point. It's not about black boxes. It's also about like who is responsible. And if you go to the tech people, they normally say like, well, the business asked me this, and then we just did it. It's not our responsible. You go to the business and they say, well, we didn't do it. So I think it's not about just like that they are it's not about that they are not taking the responsibility. They are not seeing that it's their responsibility. And I think it's also about cultural shift, because they are they're really clever at discussing what we are discussing in this seminar about data privacy, but it needs to be like kind of cultural shift, that it's not social science that come to the conference and say, but there's social and cultural impacts also. But it's what I do in my daily life. It's like I'm trying to get my team to understand that there might be also ethical issues. And I'm in a point when I'm learning that if I try to help them to understand that, it comes to Anni's perspective. So it's personalized into me. So every time I open my mic, they know what I'm starting to say. Okay, now we forgot. Now we forgot. We need to think about the impact. But I'm reaching to a point where somebody was, we were discussing about predictive models. And I wasn't in the conversation, but a guy turned into me like, should we have like ethical? Yes, well, finally, it's not my perspective, it's everybody's perspective. And it's not about data privacy only. It's of course data privacy. It's of course all of these we're talking about. Where is the social, cultural impact? And I think that's the public value. And it's not our perspective. It should be everybody's.
Mina.
Yeah, just adding a little bit to this, because I think that it is a bit dangerous if our public debates go from one scandal to another and nothing changes. So out of frustration, I wrote a book. It's called The Feel of Algorithms, where I'm showing that people, think about these things. They think about values all the time, of course, because autonomy, for instance, is super important. How do you create autonomous spaces in these services which are basically using you as a data subject? So these kinds of value trade-offs are constantly there, but somehow what happens in our everyday lives in relation to these systems is not enough part of public debate. So I would like to see like a move to much more mundane way of talking about these things and not waiting for the next scandal.
Yeah, great. Another question.
Yeah, what's not being talked about is why we bash down on with the reason why we come up with the system. I'm from Holland, by the way, because we had migrant workers who illegally applied for the child benefit, and it cost us like 1 million, and now it will cost us billions because of the algorithm that's in place. So I think it's more like a maturity issue, right? It's like you come up with a solution for a problem, because the reason why we had the scandal is actually we had a broad part of the Dutch government who said, yes, you have to do something about this problem of all the costs that's going on to this migrant. So is it more like redesigning the process, just like a product development, and accepting failure as a possibility, and because it needs like a political bravery to just do something with it and say it can be a solution, AI. So I was wondering how you guys think about that. So
So yeah, I think that the failure is ingrained in any technology. So this is also what Paul Virilio in the book said, the original accident. So when you build a car, you also conceive of the car accident. And if you build a plane, there will be the plane crash. I think that is inherent to technology. However, I think that our policymakers, politicians, do not really think about technology. And they're unfortunately often very techno-determinist or technocratic without a solid understanding of technology, which is really problematic. So I think this really goes back to critical discourse. I'm utterly disappointed that journalists never did the math, never looked at the cost of what the Dutch call the Bulgarian fraud, and that we now have much higher costs, that in the top 10 of each municipality of families in debt relief are victims of the childcare benefit affair. So it became for society much more expensive. And also to think about which fraud do we want to sanction, which fraud do we want to limit. Do we suppose as a society that poor people are inclined to commit fraud while rich people are less inclined to commit fraud, which is actually how our system at the moment is built. The system suggests that rich people are less inclined to commit fraud. If you look at the numbers, we would gain much more if we would sanction the white-collar crime and the rich more rigorously than if we would try to get the peanuts back from the small percentage that is ripping off social benefits. But that aside, I think to go back to this discussion where we can go beyond failures, we see ad hoc reactions, and several have been mentioned. I think that what we should do as societies is go from the ad hoc reactions, the many repair attempts that take place on local levels that are often invisible labor, to formalize those, to stabilize those. So I see that you have now city councils that are aware of this fact, that public institutions hire data ethics officers. The province of South Holland, and she's sitting there, has the first one that's full-time employed, but each of the provinces in the Netherlands has a person that is doing that. That there are committees, citizen committees, that comment upon the data practices of their municipalities. But the question would then be, what is their agency? That it becomes an institutional perspective and not the perspective of an individual like Annie, but that it is a broadly shared understanding. If we use technology, we need to be competent in its use. We need to think clearly about what is the pretext under which we procure it. And there can be market power built. Municipalities can band together. European nations can band together and actually force big tech companies to comply.
So I have room for one more question. So this is a little bit tricky. Whose question is about repairing efforts? Yours? Yeah, okay, you were the first one, sorry.
You'll judge for yourselves, but based on the cases you have experience with and like the increasing spread and use of AI tech, do you think it is a case to be made for governments to establish like national accident investigatory boards for AI failures, for instance, like you have in aviation, for instance? Or is this more kind of a sectorally or internally to each organization's better handled case?
I will say something about this because the problem, I will try to not answer to your question by saying that there's so much more that we need in AI governance in countries before thinking about agencies for failures. I mean, in the sense that the agencies, for example, the national bodies that will need to exist because of the AI Act, will have to deal with failures. I mean, ideally, they should have the means to, and the funds and the funding to have some people that look at, what goes wrong in the, supervision that they have to do. So they have to supervise what happens in that country at the AI level. So then there is DPA that already does this. For example, in Italy, I know that they do it. So they do it for data practices, but in the end, they do it with unfair practices that relate to data in general. So that's really important. But then, you know, this is not something that we talked about, but it's really concerning what is maybe happening or about to happen in some countries related to national bodies and national governance with AI. In Italy, again, for example, the government just said that they will nominate 2 governmental agencies to do it. In combination, they will be together and do this. And they're really close to the government. So especially one of these, it's really close to the government, so it's really politically driven. And I think this might be a problem. I mean, if we think about the fact that governmental technologies might go wrong, I'm not sure whether a governmental agency is the best to do this. So I would start, you know, from the beginning and then think about who is the one that should be in charge for the failures in governments, for example.
Thank you so much. This is, I think, food for thought for all of us. And with that, we go into the lunch break. Thank you so much for joining this panel. Our panelists will be here for just a while to answer some questions you might still have. Please join us tomorrow also for the FRAIA workshop, the Fundamental Rights and Algorithms Impact Assessment workshop. And I wish you a good conference. Thank you.